Blackwells Struggle. When Lady Cecily of Briarwood was promised to Sir William de Moray, a man she had never met, she accepted her fate with quiet resignation. But when she saw him at the altar tall, scarred, and watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, she realized marriage was not the only thing being sealed. His voice was low as he took her hand. "You are mine now, Cecily," he murmured. "Do you understand?" Chapter 1. The Vow Unspoken. The chill of the stone chapel seeped into Cecily's bones, a coldness that mirrored the numbness in her heart. The heavy velvet of her wedding gown, a rich, deep crimson embroidered with threads of gold depicting the intertwined roses of her house and the fierce stags of the de Morays, felt more like a shroud than a symbol of celebration. She stared ahead, her gaze fixed on the stained glass window depicting Saint Michael vanquishing the dragon, a scene of righteous fury that felt utterly foreign to the quiet surrender she felt within. The scent of incense, thick and cloying, mingled with the fainter, earthier smell of the rushes strewn across the floor, a constant reminder of the inescapable reality of her life. Her fingers, laced tightly together in her lap, were icy despite the warmth of the small, fur-lined muff tucked beneath her skirts. She could feel the eyes of the assembled guests upon her, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and perhaps a touch of envy. She was, after all, Lady Cecily of Briarwood, the sole heir to a considerable estate, and now, the bride of Sir William de Moray, a knight renowned for his ferocity in battle and his unwavering loyalty to the king. A match brokered for political expediency, for the joining of two powerful houses, for the consolidation of land and influence. Love, it seemed, had no place in such transactions. Her father, Lord Alaric of Briarwood, stood beside her, his hand resting heavily on her shoulder. It was a gesture meant to be reassuring, but to Cecily, it felt like the weight of his expectations, the weight of her duty, pressing down upon her. He had spoken to her, earlier that morning, his voice gruff with a tenderness he rarely displayed. "This is for the good of our house, Cecily," he had said, his gaze avoiding hers. "De Moray is a strong man, a good man. He will protect you." Protect her? From what? From the whispers of court, from the machinations of rivals, from the ever-present threat of war? Or from the loneliness that had been her constant companion since her mother's death, a decade past? Cecily doubted that even a man as formidable as Sir William de Moray could shield her from that. The chanting of the priest, Father Thomas, a thin, reedy voice that echoed through the vastness of the chapel, washed over her. She barely registered the Latin words, the familiar phrases of the marriage rite. She was a vessel, an object being transferred from one man's possession to another. Her own wishes, her own desires, were irrelevant. And then he arrived. The heavy oak doors of the chapel swung open, admitting a gust of wind that stirred the tapestries hanging on the walls and sent a shiver down Cecily's spine. A hush fell over the assembly, and all eyes turned towards the entrance. Sir William de Moray strode down the aisle, his steps firm and measured, his presence filling the space with an almost palpable energy. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered, and imposing in his dark blue surcoat, embroidered with the silver stag of his house. A heavy sword hung at his side, its hilt gleaming in the filtered light. His hair, the color of dark honey, was cropped short, revealing the sharp angles of his jaw and the strong line of his neck. But it was his face that captured her attention, a face that was both striking and unsettling. A long, jagged scar ran from his temple, across his cheekbone, and down to the corner of his mouth, a permanent testament to a past battle, a past life she knew nothing about. His eyes, a deep, penetrating gray, met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink, the sounds of the chapel fading into a distant hum. There was an intensity in his gaze, a scrutiny that made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't a look of judgment, nor of coldness, but something else entirely, a careful assessment, a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher, something that stirred a flicker of unease and, strangely, a spark of curiosity within her. He reached the altar, his gaze never leaving hers. Father Thomas cleared his throat, and the ceremony resumed. Cecily felt a tremor run through her as Sir William took her hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his fingers calloused but warm against her cold skin. His voice, when he spoke his vows, was low and resonant, a voice that seemed to vibrate through her very being. I, William, take thee, Cecily, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. His words were formal, the expected pronouncements of a marriage vow, yet the way he held her gaze, the subtle pressure of his fingers on hers, hinted at something more, something unspoken. When it was her turn to speak, Cecily's voice trembled slightly. She repeated the vows, her eyes locked with his, trying to find some semblance of the man she was now bound to for life. She saw strength, yes, and a hint of weariness, but also something else, a guardedness, a vulnerability that he kept carefully hidden. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and murmured, so softly that only she could hear, "You are mine now, Cecily. Do you understand?" The words were not a threat, but a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership that sent a shiver of both fear and a strange, unexpected thrill through her. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement, her throat too tight to speak. It was not just a marriage that was being sealed, but a pact, an agreement whose full implications she was only beginning to grasp. The weight of the gold band he slid onto her finger felt heavier than any chain. She was his. And her life, as she knew it, was over. The chapel doors remained closed, as the ceremony came to a close. Her future awaited, behind his eyes and contained within his scarred and powerful hands. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Keep. The journey to Moray Keep was a blur of wind-whipped landscapes and strained silences. Cecily sat stiffly in the enclosed carriage, the rich velvet cushions offering little comfort against the jarring motion of the wheels on the rough, uneven roads. She had barely spoken a word to her new husband since leaving the chapel, and he, in turn, had offered little in the way of conversation. He rode alongside the carriage on his great warhorse, a magnificent black stallion named Shadow, his presence a constant, silent reminder of her new reality. The countryside, a tapestry of rolling hills and dense forests, was beautiful in its own wild way, but Cecily found little solace in its beauty. Her thoughts were a tangled knot of anxieties and uncertainties. She knew nothing of this man, this Sir William de Moray, beyond his reputation as a fierce warrior and a loyal subject of the king. What were his expectations of her? What kind of life awaited her at Moray Keep? She stole glances at him through the small window of the carriage, watching the way he sat his horse, his posture straight and unwavering, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon. He seemed utterly at ease in the saddle, as if he were more comfortable in the company of his horse than with his own bride. The scar on his face, stark and prominent in the fading light, seemed to deepen his aura of mystery and danger. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as they approached the keep. Moray Keep, perched atop a craggy hill overlooking a vast expanse of moorland, was an imposing sight. Its gray stone walls, thick and formidable, rose high into the twilight sky, its battlements silhouetted against the fading light. It was a fortress, a stronghold, built to withstand sieges and repel enemies. And now it was her home. As they passed through the massive iron gates and into the outer bailey, Cecily felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. The courtyard was bustling with activity, stable hands tending to horses, men at arms sharpening their swords, servants scurrying about their duties. The air was filled with the sounds of clanging metal, the neighing of horses, and the shouts of men. It was a world entirely different from the quiet, sheltered life she had known at Briarwood. William dismounted and came to the carriage door, offering her his hand. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, his touch sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. He helped her down from the carriage, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. A hint of what? Concern? Courtesy? She couldn't quite decipher it. "Welcome to Moray Keep, my lady," he said, his voice low and resonant. It was the first time he had spoken to her directly since the wedding ceremony. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, my lord." He led her through the courtyard and into the great hall of the keep. The hall was vast and cavernous, its high, vaulted ceiling supported by massive stone pillars. A large fire roared in the hearth at the far end of the room, casting flickering shadows on the tapestries that adorned the walls. Long tables were set for the evening meal, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasting meat and spices. A woman, tall and slender with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes, approached them. She wore a simple, elegant gown of dark green, and a silver chain with a large, intricately carved key hung at her waist. "My lord," she said, curtsying deeply to William. "Welcome home." She turned to Cecily, her gaze appraising but not unkind. "And you, my lady?" "I am Alara, the housekeeper of Moray Keep. I trust your journey was not too arduous?" Cecily managed a small smile. "It was tolerable, thank you." Alara nodded. "I have prepared the Lord's chambers for you both. If you will follow me?" Cecily glanced at William, seeking some sign of reassurance, but his face was unreadable. He simply nodded, and they followed Alara up a winding stone staircase and along a long, dark corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women, the ancestors of the de Moray family, their eyes seeming to follow Cecily as she passed. The air grew colder as they ascended, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps on the stone floor. They reached a heavy oak door, intricately carved with the image of a rearing stag. Alara produced the key from her chain and unlocked the door, pushing it open to reveal a large, richly appointed chamber. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the dark wood paneling and the heavy velvet curtains that draped the windows. A large four-poster bed, hung with rich tapestries, dominated the room. Alara gestured towards the bed. "I have had fresh linens laid, my lady, and a warm bath prepared, if you wish to refresh yourself." Cecily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. This was it. This was her wedding chamber, the place where she would begin her new life as Lady de Moray. She felt a wave of panic rising within her, a desperate urge to flee, to return to the familiar comfort of Briarwood. William, who had remained silent throughout the tour of the house, finally spoke. His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. "Alara, would you leave us, please?" Alara curtsied and withdrew, closing the door behind her. Cecily was left alone with her husband, in the heart of his ancestral home, surrounded by the shadows of his past. He stood by the fire, his back to her, his shoulders tense. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackling of the flames. She didn't know how to act, how to present herself. She was out of her depth. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. The scar on his face seemed to stand out in sharper relief in the firelight. "You are afraid," he said, his voice not accusing, but simply stating a fact. He closed the distance to her and cupped the back of her head with his hand. Her body was tense, bracing. He felt this, and the words he whispered surprised her. "Do not be. I will not hurt you, Cecily." His eyes bored into her, and she felt a small measure of the fear begin to leave. Just a small amount. Chapter 3. The Knight's Scar. The bath, a large wooden tub filled with steaming water scented with lavender and rose petals, did little to soothe Cecily's frayed nerves. She sank into the warmth, letting the water envelop her, but her mind remained a whirlwind of anxieties. William's words, "I will not hurt you," echoed in her thoughts, a promise that offered a fragile glimmer of hope, yet also a stark reminder of the power he held over her. She had dismissed the serving girl, preferring to be alone with her thoughts. The silence of the chamber, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional sigh of the wind outside, was both comforting and unnerving. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure an image of her mother, of the gentle smile and soothing voice that had always been her refuge. but the memory felt distant, fading like a dream. She thought of Briarwood, of the familiar routines of her life there, the early morning prayers in the chapel, the walks in the gardens, the evenings spent embroidering by the fire. It all seemed so far away now, a world she had left behind forever. She scrubbed her skin with a soft cloth, washing away the dust of the journey, but also, she hoped, some of the fear and uncertainty that clung to her. She needed to be strong, to face this new life with courage and resilience. She was Lady de Moray now, the mistress of Moray Keep. She had responsibilities, duties to fulfill. She rose from the bath, wrapping herself in a large, soft towel. A simple linen nightgown, laid out on a nearby chest, awaited her. She slipped it on, the cool fabric a welcome contrast to the warmth of her skin. As she turned, she saw William standing by the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. He had removed his surcoat and sword, and his linen shirt, open at the neck, revealed the strong column of his throat and the hint of dark hair on his chest. He turned as she approached, his eyes meeting hers. He had been watching her, she realized, and a blush rose to her cheeks. He didn't speak, simply studying her with that intense, unreadable gaze. The silence stretched between them, punctuated by the soft crackle of the fire. Cecily, feeling a sudden need to break the tension, gestured towards a scar. How did you get that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He touched the scar, his fingers tracing the jagged line. It was a gesture that seemed almost unconscious, as if he were recalling the moment he had received it. "A battle," he said, his voice low and distant. "Years ago, against the Scots." She nodded, her gaze fixed on his face. She wanted to know more, to understand the man behind the scar, the warrior behind the mask of stoicism. "Was it bad?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "It was war, Cecily. War is always bad." He paused, his gaze shifting to the fire. "I was young, reckless. I thought myself invincible." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a shadow of pain. "I learned otherwise." She took a step closer, drawn to the vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his hardened exterior. "It must have hurt terribly." He met her gaze, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. She saw a flicker of raw emotion, a glimpse of the pain he had endured, the fear he had faced. "It did," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But the pain, it fades. The memories, they linger." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, as if he were about to touch her. But then he hesitated, his hand dropping back to his side. "You should rest," he said, his voice regaining its composure. "You have had a long day." Cecily nodded, her heart aching for him, for the pain he carried within him. She moved towards the bed, the heavy curtains casting long shadows across the room. He remained by the window, a solitary figure silhouetted against the moonlight. As she slipped beneath the covers, the soft linen cool against her skin, she realized that she was no longer simply afraid of him. She was intrigued. She wanted to know him, to understand the secrets he held within him, the burdens he carried. She wanted to unravel the mystery of the night scar, and in doing so, perhaps, unravel the mystery of her own heart. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would delve further into the duties that lay before her. But for now, she would try to find some rest, with the promise her husband had given her tonight playing over and over, to give her comfort. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Gallery. The morning light, filtering through the heavy curtains of the bedchamber, woke Cecily. She lay for a moment, disoriented, her mind slowly grasping the reality of her new surroundings. William was gone, the space beside her in the bed empty and cold. She rose, dressing quickly in a simple gown of gray wool, a practical garment suited for the tasks that awaited her. She found Alara, the housekeeper, in the great hall, overseeing the preparations for the morning meal. The hall was already bustling with activity, servants laying out platters of bread, cheese, and cold meats, while others stoked the fire and polished the silverware. Alara greeted her with a respectful curtsy. "Good morrow, my lady. I trust you slept well?" Cecily managed a polite smile. "Well enough. Thank you. She glanced around the hall, feeling a sense of unease at the unfamiliar faces and the sheer scale of the household. Where is my husband? The Lord is in the training yard, Alara replied. He rises early and spends the first hours of the day with his men. Cecily nodded, her curiosity piqued. She had seen the men-at-arms in the courtyard the previous day, but she had not yet witnessed William in his role as their commander. Perhaps I could observe? She asked hesitantly. Alara seemed slightly surprised by her request, but she nodded. Of course, my lady. I will take you there. They walked through the keep, Alara explaining the various rooms and their functions. The kitchens, the buttery, the solar, the chapel. Cecily listened attentively, trying to absorb the details of her new domain. She was determined to learn the workings of Moray Keep, to understand her role within it, to prove herself a capable mistress. They reached a narrow doorway that led to a long, covered gallery overlooking the training yard. The gallery was dimly lit, the air cool and damp. The walls were lined with portraits of de Moray ancestors, their stern faces seeming to judge her as she passed. Alara gestured towards a small alcove with a window offering a clear view of the yard below. You may watch from here, my lady, she said. The Lord will not be disturbed. Cecily thanked her and stepped into the alcove. Below, in the sun-drenched yard, William was engaged in sword practice with several of his men. He had shed his shirt, and his muscular torso, glistening with sweat, was a testament to his physical strength. He moved with a grace and power that was both breathtaking and intimidating. She watched him, mesmerized, as he parried and thrust, his movements fluid and precise. The clang of steel on steel echoed through the yard, a constant reminder of the ever-present threat of violence that shaped their lives. She saw the respect in the eyes of his men, the way they obeyed his commands without question. He was their leader, their protector, and they, in turn, were fiercely loyal to him. As she watched, she noticed a group of women gathered near the stables, their eyes also fixed on William. They were whispering amongst themselves, their glances filled with admiration, and perhaps something more. Cecily felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Jealousy? Resentment? She wasn't sure. One of the women, a young, strikingly beautiful woman with long, flowing red hair and a bold gaze, caught Cecily's eye. She smiled a knowing, almost mocking smile, and gave a slight nod. Cecily felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She recognized the woman. It was the same woman she had seen in the courtyard the previous day, the one who had been whispering with the others. Alara, who had remained standing silently behind Cecily, cleared her throat. That is Lady Moira, she said, her voice low and discreet. She is a cousin of the Lord's. A distant cousin. Cecily nodded, her gaze still fixed on Moira. There was something about the woman that made her uneasy, a sense of rivalry, perhaps. Or something more sinister. She seems close to my husband, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Alara hesitated for a moment. They grew up together, she said carefully. They were playmates as children. Cecily understood the unspoken implication. Playmates. Perhaps more than playmates. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The whispers in the gallery, the knowing glances, the subtle hints, they all pointed to a past relationship, a connection that went beyond mere friendship. William, seemingly oblivious to the scrutiny he was under, continued his training, his focus unwavering. But Cecily could no longer watch him with the same detached admiration. The whispers in the gallery had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of suspicion, in her heart. And she knew that she would not rest until she had uncovered the truth about William's past and about the woman who seemed to hold a claim on his affections. Chapter 5. The Falcon's Flight. The days that followed settled into a routine, a rhythm dictated by the demands of the keep and the customs of medieval life. Cecily spent her mornings with Alara, learning the intricacies of managing a large household, overseeing the kitchen staff, checking the stores of food and supplies, tending to the needs of the servants. She found a quiet satisfaction in these tasks, a sense of purpose that helped to ease the loneliness and uncertainty she felt. In the afternoons, She often sought refuge in the small, walled garden behind the keep. It was a peaceful oasis, a place where she could escape the watchful eyes and whispering tongues of the household. She would sit on a stone bench beneath an ancient apple tree, reading from a small, leather-bound book of Psalms, or simply gazing at the flowers and herbs that grew in neat, orderly rows. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the garden, William found her. He had been hunting, he said, and had brought back a falcon, a magnificent bird of prey with sharp talons and piercing eyes. He held the bird perched on his gloved hand, its leather jesses trailing down. "I thought you might enjoy seeing her," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "She is a fine hunter." Cecily looked at the falcon, her initial apprehension giving way to a sense of wonder. The bird was beautiful, its feathers a mix of brown and gray, its eyes bright and alert. "She is magnificent," she said, her voice filled with admiration. William smiled, a rare and genuine smile that transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him seem almost boyish. "Her name is Lyra," he said. After the constellation, he showed her how to hold the falcon, how to stroke its feathers, how to speak to it in a soothing voice. Cecily felt a thrill as the bird perched on her own gloved hand, its weight surprisingly light. She gazed into its eyes, feeling a connection to this wild, untamed creature. "Would you like to see her fly?" William asked. Cecily nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. They walked to a nearby field, a vast expanse of open grassland that stretched out towards the distant hills. William removed the falcon's hood, and the bird, with a powerful thrust of its wings, soared into the sky. Cecily watched, breathless, as it circled high above them, a tiny speck against the vast blue canvas. William whistled, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the air. The falcon, responding to his call, swooped down, returning to his outstretched hand with a grace and precision that took her breath away. "She is amazing," Cecily said, her voice filled with awe. William nodded, his gaze fixed on the falcon. "She is free," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "She chooses to return." Cecily looked at him, her heart stirred by his words. She understood the unspoken meaning. Freedom was not simply the absence of constraints, but the choice to return, the choice to be bound by loyalty, by love. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. The intensity of his gaze, the warmth in his smile, made her heart flutter. She felt a connection to him in that moment, a shared appreciation for the beauty and wildness of the falcon, a shared understanding of the complexities of freedom and loyalty. "You have a gentle touch," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "The falcon, she trusts you." Cecily blushed, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "I like animals," she said, shyly. "I always have." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "I can see that," he said. "You have a kindness about you, Cecily. A gentleness that surprises me." His words, spoken with such sincerity, touched her deeply. She had always felt overlooked, overshadowed by her father's ambition and the expectations of her station. To be seen, to be acknowledged for her inner qualities, was a new and unexpected experience. As the sun set that evening, casting a beautiful palette of colors in the sky, they walked together slowly back to the keep. He told her stories about Lyra and other falcons he had trained. She responded by sharing stories about the animals at Briarwood, the horses in particular. This was a new, very welcome interaction. A level of comfort was reached, and when they entered the great hall, Cecily realized that it was the first time since her arrival that she actually felt like she was starting to belong. The falcon's flight, the beauty of the creature, and the understanding with her husband had given her a sliver of peace. Chapter 6. A Glimpse of Steel. The tranquility Cecily found in the falcon's flight was short-lived. The following day, as she was walking through the keep, she overheard a conversation that sent a chill down her spine. She was passing the armory, a large room filled with weapons of all kinds, swords, axes, spears, bows, and arrows. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear the voices of two men-at-arms, engaged in a heated discussion. He's changed, I tell you, one of the men said, his voice low and urgent. Ever since he brought back the new wife. He's softer, distracted. He's still the best swordsman in the realm, the other man replied. Don't be a fool. But for how long? He's neglecting his duties, spending too much time with the Lady Cecily. He's forgotten his oath. Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. What oath were they talking about? And what did it have to do with her? He swore he'd never marry, the first man continued. He swore he'd devote his life to the king, to the defense of the realm. He was young then, grieving, the second man said. He needed an heir. An heir? Or a distraction. Lady Moira would have been a more suitable match. She understands him, understands his duty. Cecily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Moira again. The whispers, the knowing glances, the subtle hints, they all came flooding back. It seemed that everyone in the keep, except her, knew about William's past with Moira, about the oath he had broken to marry her. She backed away from the door, her mind reeling. She needed to know the truth, to understand the nature of the oath that bound William, the oath that he had seemingly betrayed by marrying her. She needed to know if she was merely a pawn in a larger game, a means to an end, or if there was any genuine affection between them. She found William in the training yard, as usual, overseeing the practice of his men. He was sparring with one of his knights, their swords clashing in a flurry of steel. She watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of confusion and fear. He was so skilled, so powerful, so distant. She waited until the practice was over, and the men had dispersed. He saw her standing there, her face pale and drawn, and his expression changed, a flicker of concern crossing his features. Cecily? What is it? He asked, his voice filled with a hint of worry. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. I overheard something, she said, her voice trembling slightly. In the armory. The men, they were talking about an oath. An oath you made. An oath you broke by marrying me. His face hardened, his eyes turning cold. He didn't deny it. What else did you hear? He asked, his voice sharp. They said you swore you'd never marry. That you'd devote your life to the king. That Lady Moira would have been a more suitable match. The mention of Moira's name seemed to ignite a spark of anger in his eyes. He turned away, his jaw clenched. The men speak out of turn, he said, his voice tight, with controlled fury. They do not understand. Then explain it to me, William, she pleaded. Tell me the truth. What is this oath? And why did you break it? He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. It was a long time ago, he said, his voice low and weary. After I lost someone I cared for deeply. I swore I'd never love again, never marry. I devoted myself to the king, to the sword. It was a foolish oath, made in grief and anger. And Moira? Cecily pressed, her voice trembling. What about her? He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. Moira, she understood my grief. She shared my commitment to the king. We were close. Close enough to marry? Cecily asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Cecily felt her heart breaking. She had begun to hope, to believe that there might be something real between them, but now she saw the truth. She was a substitute, a replacement for the woman he truly loved, the woman he had sworn to be with. She turned to leave, tears welling up in her eyes. But before she could take a step, he grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. Cecily, wait, he said, his voice urgent. It's not what you think. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. Then what is it, William? She asked. Tell me. Tell me why you married me, if not for love, if not for loyalty. A glimmer of steel was seen in her own eyes, for the first time, as she was no longer a meek and mild bride. He looked at her in a different way, and she pulled away. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Kiss. William's grip on her arm tightened, his eyes searching hers, a desperate plea for understanding in their depths. I married you because my king commanded it, he said, his voice raw with honesty. He needed an alliance between our houses, a strengthening of the border against the threat of rebellion. It was a matter of duty, of political necessity. Cecily's heart sank. His words confirmed her worst fears. She was a pawn, a piece in a game of power and strategy. There was no affection, no genuine desire, only cold, calculated duty. But, he continued, his voice softening, it is not only that. When I saw you at the altar, Cecily, something changed. I saw your fear, your vulnerability, but also your strength, your quiet dignity. I saw a woman who deserved more than to be a bargaining chip in a political game. She looked at him, her eyes filled with skepticism. And Moira? She asked, her voice laced with bitterness. Did you see her strength? Her dignity? He flinched, as if struck by her words. Moira is different, he said, carefully. She is a warrior, a woman who understands the demands of duty, the sacrifices required of us. She has always been a comrade, a confidant. A lover? Cecily pressed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. There was a time, he admitted, his voice low and strained. Before the oath. Before I lost everything. He turned away, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of his past were crushing him. Cecily watched him, her anger giving way to a flicker of pity, understanding. She was beginning to see the complexities of his character, the layers of pain and regret that lay beneath his stoic exterior. Tell me, she said, her voice softer now. Tell me about what you lost. He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding sorrow. He spoke of his first love, a woman named Alara, not the housekeeper, a woman he had met and courted when he was but a squire. Their planned wedding was destroyed, when she was killed in a raid by a rival clan, a senseless act of violence that had shattered his world and driven him to make the reckless oath of celibacy and service to the king. Cecily listened, her heart aching for him, for the pain he had endured, the grief he still carried. She understood now the source of his guardedness, his reluctance to open himself to love, to vulnerability. And Moira? She asked, when he had finished his story. Where did she fit into all of this? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Moira was there, he said. She helped me through the darkest days. She understood my grief, my rage. She shared my desire for vengeance. And she loved you? Cecily asked hesitantly. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers. She did, he admitted. And I cared for her. But it was not the same. It was a bond forged in grief, in shared loss, not in joy, in hope. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. When I married you, Cecily, he said, his voice low and intense, I thought I was simply fulfilling my duty. But I was wrong. You have awakened something in me, something I thought I had lost forever. A flicker of hope, a possibility of something more. His words, spoken with such sincerity, sent a shiver through her. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the possibility of a future together, a future built on something more than duty and obligation. But the shadow of Moira still loomed large, a constant reminder of his past, of the woman who had shared his grief, his pain, his life. As if summoned by her thoughts, Moira appeared at that moment, striding into the training yard with her usual confidence, her red hair gleaming in the sunlight. She wore a riding habit of dark green, her figure trim and athletic. She greeted William with a familiar smile, a touch of possessiveness in her voice. William, she said, her gaze sweeping over Cecily with a barely concealed disdain. I have been looking for you. There is a matter of some urgency that requires your attention. William nodded, his gaze shifting from Cecily to Moira. Excuse me, he said to Cecily, his voice formal and distant. He followed Moira out of the yard, leaving Cecily standing alone, her heart filled with a renewed sense of doubt and uncertainty. The serpent's kiss, she thought, the subtle poison of suspicion and jealousy, had once again found its way into her heart. She had glimpsed the possibility of love, of connection, but the shadow of Moira, the weight of William's past, threatened to extinguish that fragile flame. The serpent was Moira, and her venom was in Cecily's heart. Chapter 8. Beyond the Walls. The urgency Moira had spoken of turned out to be a summons from the king. A messenger had arrived at Moray Keep, bearing a sealed letter demanding William's immediate presence at court. The king, it seemed, was facing a growing threat of rebellion in the Northern Territories, and he required the assistance of his most trusted and skilled knight. William prepared to leave, his demeanor grave and focused. He gathered his men, issued instructions, and made arrangements for the defense of the keep in his absence. Cecily watched him, her heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. She knew that this journey was dangerous, that the threat of war loomed large. She tried to speak to him, to express her concerns, but he was distant, preoccupied with the preparations for his departure. He treated her with a polite courtesy, but the warmth, the tentative connection they had shared, seemed to have vanished. Moira, ever present, hovered around him, offering advice, assisting with his armor, her manner possessive and proprietary. Cecily felt a surge of resentment, a bitter taste of jealousy in her mouth. She was his wife, yet she felt like an outsider, excluded from his inner circle, his true loyalties. Before he left, William sought Cecily out in the small chapel, where she had gone to pray for his safe return. He found her kneeling before the altar, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly together. He stood beside her, his presence filling the small space. "Cecily," he said, his voice low and solemn, "I do not know how long I will be gone, but I want you to know I do not regret marrying you. You are a good wife, a strong woman." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance. "And Moira?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What is she to you?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. "Moira is a friend, a comrade. She has been loyal to me, to the king." "And nothing more?" Cecily pressed, her heart aching for the truth. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. "She is a part of my past," he said carefully. "A past I cannot erase. But you are my present, and perhaps my future." His words offered a glimmer of hope, a fragile promise that she clung to desperately. But she knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the shadow of Moira, the threat of war, would continue to test their fragile bond. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a chaste, fleeting gesture that nonetheless sent a shiver through her. "Be safe, Cecily," he said, "and take care of the keep." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the chapel. Cecily remained kneeling, her heart filled with a turmoil of emotions. She prayed for his safety, for his return, but also for the strength to face the challenges that lay ahead, the challenges that threatened to tear them apart. With William gone, Cecily felt a renewed sense of isolation. The keep seemed larger, emptier, without his presence. The whispers of the servants, the knowing glances of the women, intensified, fueling her insecurities and doubts. She decided to take a ride, beyond the walls to clear her mind, and she had never done that before. She saddled her horse, a gentle mare named Rose, and rode out of the keep, accompanied by 2 of her guards. She needed to escape the confines of the walls, to breathe the fresh air, to feel the wind in her hair. She rode for hours, exploring the countryside surrounding the keep. The landscape was wild and beautiful, a tapestry of rolling hills, dense forests, and sparkling streams. She felt a sense of freedom, a release from the constraints of her life within the keep. As she rode, she came across a small village, nestled in a valley beneath the shadow of the keep. The villagers, simple folk who tilled the land and tended to their livestock, greeted her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She spoke to them, asking about their lives, their concerns, their needs. She realized that she had a responsibility to these people, a duty to protect and care for them, just as William did. She was not just Lady de Moray, the mistress of the keep, but also the protector of this land, these people. She returned to the keep late in the afternoon, her mind clearer, her resolve strengthened. She had a purpose, a role to play, even in William's absence. She would not be a passive, helpless wife, waiting for her husband's return. She would be a strong, capable mistress, managing the keep, caring for the people, and preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. As she entered the great hall, she saw Alara waiting for her face etched with concern. "My lady," she said, "Lady Moira has been searching for you. She is displeased that you left the keep without her permission." Cecily felt a surge of defiance. "I am the mistress of this keep, Alara," she said, her voice firm. "I do not need Lady Moira's permission to ride on my own lands." She knew that she was challenging Moira's authority, that she was risking a confrontation. But she no longer cared. She would not be intimidated, not be controlled. She was Lady de Moray, and she would assert her rightful place, both within the keep and beyond its walls. The die had been cast. Chapter 9. The Price of Loyalty. Cecily's defiance of Moira did not go unremarked. The following days were filled with a subtle but palpable tension between the two women. Moira's usual air of confidence was replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. She made her displeasure known through veiled insults, pointed remarks, and a constant undermining of Cecily's authority. Cecily, in turn, refused to be cowed. She continued to oversee the running of the keep, making decisions, issuing orders, and interacting with the servants and tenants with a newfound confidence. She drew strength from her growing connection to the land and the people, from the sense of purpose she had found beyond the walls of the keep. One evening, as Cecily was dining in the great hall, Moira entered, her face flushed with anger. She approached Cecily, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I have received word from my cousin," she said, her eyes flashing. "He is displeased with your conduct. He has heard reports of your unauthorized excursions, your disregard for his instructions." Cecily met Moira's gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "My husband instructed me to take care of the keep," she said, her voice calm but firm. "That is what I am doing." "You are exceeding your authority," Moira retorted. "You are behaving as if you are the true mistress of Moray Keep, when you are merely a placeholder." Cecily felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I am Lady de Moray," she said. "I am William's wife, and I will act in his best interests and in the best interests of this keep and its people." "His best interests?" Moira scoffed. "You know nothing of his best interests. You know nothing of the sacrifices he has made, the burdens he carries." "And you do?" Cecily challenged, her voice rising slightly. "You claim to know him so well, yet you cling to a past that is long gone. You hold on to a memory, a ghost, while he has moved on." Moira's face contorted with rage. "He has not moved on," she spat. "He may be married to you, but his heart, his loyalty belongs to me." The words struck Cecily like a physical blow. She had tried to ignore the whispers, the hints, the obvious connection between William and Moira, but now, hearing it spoken aloud, with such venomous certainty, it was impossible to deny. "You are mistaken," Cecily said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. "William, he cares for me. He has shown me kindness, respect." "Kindness? Respect?" Moira laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Those are the crumbs he throws to you, the scraps of affection he can spare from his true devotion. He pities you, Cecily. He sees you as a weak, fragile creature who needs his protection. But he does not love you." Cecily flinched, Moira's words piercing her heart like shards of glass. She wanted to deny them, to refute them with all her might, but a seed of doubt had been planted, a seed that threatened to blossom into a full-blown fear. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the great hall. A group of men-at-arms burst in, their faces grim, their armor stained with blood. They were escorting a prisoner, a man bound and gagged, his clothes torn and dirty. The leader of the men-at-arms approached Cecily and Moira, bowing deeply. "My ladies," he said, his voice grave, "we have captured a spy. He was found lurking near the keep, gathering information about our defenses." Cecily's mind raced. A spy? What information could he be seeking? And who was he working for? Moira stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. "Question him," she commanded. "Find out who sent him, what he knows." The men at arms dragged the prisoner to the center of the hall, forcing him to his knees. He was a young man, his face pale and terrified. Moira began to interrogate him, her voice harsh and relentless. She demanded answers, threatening him with torture, with death. The prisoner, trembling with fear, remained silent. Cecily watched the scene unfold, her heart filled with a growing unease. She understood the need to protect the keep, to uncover any threats, but Moira's methods seemed excessive, cruel. She stepped forward, her voice interrupting Moira's interrogation. "Enough," she said, her voice firm. "We will not resort to torture. We will treat this prisoner with dignity. We will offer him food, water, and a chance to speak freely." Moira turned to Cecily, her eyes blazing with fury. "You interfere again?" she hissed. "This is a matter of security, of survival. We cannot afford mercy. We cannot afford to lose our humanity," Cecily retorted. "We are not barbarians. We will uphold the laws of justice, even in times of war." The men at arms looked from Cecily to Moira, uncertain of whom to obey. The tension in the hall was palpable, the air thick with the conflict between the two women. The price of loyalty, Cecily realized, was not just to one's lord, but to one's own conscience, one's own values. And she knew that she could not betray those values, even for the sake of security, even for the sake of pleasing her husband. She steeled herself and stared directly at Moira. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Past. Cecily's intervention in the interrogation of the spy created a rift between her and Moira that seemed irreparable. The two women, now openly hostile, vied for control of the keep, their conflict mirroring the larger struggle brewing between the king and the rebellious northern lords. Cecily, despite her initial apprehension, proved to be a capable and compassionate leader. She ordered the spy to be treated humanely, providing him with food, water, and medical attention for his injuries. She spoke to him calmly, patiently, assuring him that he would not be tortured, that he would be given a fair hearing. To everyone's surprise, the spy, whose name was Thomas, responded to Cecily's kindness. He confessed that he had been sent by Lord Renly, one of the most powerful of the rebellious northern lords, to gather information about Moray Keep's defenses. He revealed Renly's plans to attack the keep, believing it to be a strategic stronghold that would give him control of the surrounding territory. Thomas also revealed something else, something that shocked Cecily to her core. He claimed that Renly had an ally within Moray Keep, someone who was providing him with information, someone who was betraying William's trust. Cecily's mind raced. Who could it be? Who within the keep would betray William, would betray their oaths of loyalty? Suspicion immediately fell on Moira, given her past connection to William and her open hostility towards Cecily. But Cecily couldn't be certain. She needed proof, evidence that would confirm her suspicions. She confided in Alara, the housekeeper, sharing her concerns and asking for her help in uncovering the traitor. Alara, who had served the de Moray family for many years, was initially reluctant to believe that anyone within the keep would be capable of such treachery. But she trusted Cecily's judgment, and she agreed to help. Together, they began to investigate, discreetly questioning the servants, observing the movements of the household staff, and searching for any clues that might reveal the traitor's identity. It was a dangerous game, a delicate dance of suspicion and deception. One evening, as Cecily was walking through the keep, she noticed a light flickering in William's private study, a room that had remained locked since his departure. She knew that only William and Moira had keys to the study. She felt a surge of suspicion, a growing conviction that Moira was the traitor. She summoned Alara, and together they approached the study. The door was slightly ajar, and they could hear voices whispering inside. Cecily carefully pushed the door open, and they slipped into the room, concealing themselves behind a large tapestry. They saw Moira standing by the window, speaking in hushed tones to a shadowy figure concealed in the darkness. Cecily couldn't see the figure's face, but she recognized Moira's voice and the urgency of her words. "The attack must be soon," Moira was saying. "William is expected to return within the week. We must strike before he arrives. And the Lady Cecily? The shadowy figure asked, his voice a low, guttural growl. She suspects something, Moira replied. But she has no proof. She is a fool, easily manipulated. Cecily's heart pounded in her chest. She had her proof. Moira was the traitor, the serpent who had been plotting against them all along. We must silence her, the figure said. Permanently. I will take care of it, Moira replied, her voice cold and calculating. She will not interfere with our plans. Cecily and Alara exchanged a horrified glance. They had heard enough. They slipped out of the study, unnoticed, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just witnessed. Cecily knew that she was in grave danger. Moira was plotting to kill her, to remove her as an obstacle to her plans. She needed to act quickly, to protect herself, to expose Moira's treachery. She was at a loss. She also finally understood. It was always about taking William's place for Moira. It made sense, and yet the cruelty was stunning. As she sat in her room, she made the decision that no matter what happened to her, she had to find a way to warn William. Her husband, the man she was slowly, against all odds, beginning to truly love. She could hear Moira's footsteps outside her door. Her time was up. Chapter 11. A Dance of Deception. Knowing that Moira was actively plotting against her, Cecily realized she had to act with extreme caution. She could no longer trust anyone within the keep, except perhaps Alara, who had proven her loyalty. She needed to find a way to send a message to William, to warn him of the impending attack and of Moira's treachery, without alerting Moira to her plans. She spent the next day devising a plan, carefully considering every possible scenario. She knew that Moira would be watching her closely, scrutinizing her every move. She had to appear calm, unsuspecting, while secretly working to undermine Moira's plot. She decided to use Thomas, the captured spy, as her unwitting messenger. She visited him in his cell, offering him a chance to redeem himself, to earn his freedom by carrying a message to William. She told him only part of the truth, omitting Moira's involvement, fearing that he might betray her if he knew the full extent of the conspiracy. She wrote a letter to William, carefully wording it to convey the urgency of the situation without revealing too much information. She sealed it with her personal seal, a small silver ring bearing the crest of her family. She instructed Thomas to deliver the letter directly to William and to no one else. Thomas, desperate to regain his freedom, agreed to her terms. Cecily, with Alara's help, arranged for his escape, making it appear as if he had overpowered his guards and fled the keep. With the message sent, Cecily had to play a dangerous game of deception, pretending to be oblivious to Moira's plotting while secretly preparing for the inevitable attack. She spent her days overseeing the keep's defenses, ensuring that the walls were reinforced, the weapons were sharpened, and the men-at-arms were ready for battle. Moira, meanwhile, continued her charade, acting as if she were the loyal and devoted cousin, concerned only for William's safety and the well-being of the keep. She questioned Cecily about Thomas's escape, expressing her outrage and suspicion, but Cecily maintained her composure, feigning ignorance and innocence. The tension between the two women was palpable, a silent battle of wills and deception. They danced around each other, each aware of the other's treachery, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. One evening, as Cecily was walking through the great hall, she saw Moira standing by the fireplace, talking to one of the men-at-arms, a burly, scarred warrior named Gareth. Gareth was known for his loyalty to William, but Cecily had noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor in recent days, a hint of unease, of divided loyalty. She approached them, her voice calm and polite. "Lady Moira," she said, "is there something I can help you with?" Moira turned to her, her eyes cold and calculating. "I was just discussing the security of the keep with Gareth," she said, "ensuring that we are prepared for any eventuality." "Of course," Cecily replied. "We must all be vigilant." She looked at Gareth, her gaze searching his face. "Gareth," she said, "you have served my husband loyally for many years. I trust you will continue to do so?" Gareth hesitated, his gaze shifting from Cecily to Moira. He seemed torn, uncertain of whom to obey. "My lady," he said, his voice strained. I am loyal to Lord William. I would never betray him. But you would betray his wife?" Cecily pressed, her voice sharp. Gareth flinched, his eyes filled with a flicker of guilt. Moira stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Gareth is loyal to the de Moray family," she said. "He understands the importance of duty." "Duty to whom, Moira?" Cecily challenged. "To William? Or to you?" The hall fell silent, all eyes fixed on the three figures standing by the fireplace. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Cecily knew that she was walking a tightrope, that one wrong move could expose her, could lead to her death. But she could not back down. She had to confront Moira, to expose her treachery, to protect William and the keep, even if it meant risking her own life. It was a delicate dance, and Cecily, against her nature, was finding she had a natural aptitude. She decided she would test Gareth, right then and there. She had to know. Chapter 12. The Unveiling. Cecily took a step closer to Gareth, her gaze unwavering, her voice low and steady. "Gareth," she said, "I know you are a man of honor. I know you have served my husband faithfully for many years. But I also know that you are being torn between your loyalty to him and something else. Something that Moira is offering you." Gareth's eyes darted nervously between Cecily and Moira. He opened his mouth to speak, but Moira cut him off. "Enough of this charade, Cecily," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Gareth is loyal to me, as are all the men at arms in this keep. They understand the true meaning of duty, the true meaning of loyalty. They know that you are an outsider, a usurper, a threat to the de Moray legacy." Cecily ignored Moira, her focus remaining on Gareth. "Gareth," she said, "I am offering you a choice. You can remain loyal to Moira, to her lies and her treachery, and face the consequences when William returns. Or you can choose to be loyal to your true lord, to the man who has always trusted you, and help me expose Moira's plot." Gareth hesitated, his face a mask of conflict. He looked at Moira, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and doubt. He looked at Cecily, his eyes filled with a flicker of hope, respect. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You know what is right, Gareth," Cecily said, her voice gentle but firm. "You know in your heart what is true. Choose wisely." Moira, sensing that she was losing control, stepped forward, her hand reaching for the dagger at her belt. "Gareth," she said, her voice laced with menace. "Do not listen to her. She is trying to deceive you, to turn you against me. Remember your oath. Remember your loyalty." Gareth looked at Moira, his eyes filled with a growing horror. He saw the desperation in her face, the cold calculation in her eyes. He realized the truth, the terrible truth that he had been trying to deny. Moira was not the loyal, devoted cousin she pretended to be. She was a traitor, a manipulator, a murderer. He took a step back, his hand moving away from his own weapon. "My lady," he said to Cecily, his voice trembling but firm. I will help you. I will tell you everything I know." Moira's face contorted with rage. "You betray me, Gareth?" she hissed. "You dare to betray me?" She lunged at Cecily, her dagger flashing in the firelight. But Gareth, acting on instinct, stepped in front of Cecily, shielding her from the attack. The dagger plunged into his arm, drawing a cry of pain. The great hall erupted in chaos. Men at arms rushed forward, their swords drawn. Cecily, seizing the opportunity, shouted, "Moira is the traitor. She is working with Lord Renly. She is plotting to attack the keep." The men at arms hesitated, uncertain of whom to believe. They looked from Cecily to Moira, their faces filled with confusion and doubt. Alara, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward, her voice ringing out through the hall. "It is true," she cried. "I have seen it with my own eyes. I have heard her plotting with a stranger. She is the one who betrayed Lord William." The men at arms, hearing Alara's testimony, finally turned against Moira. They surrounded her, their swords pointed at her, their faces grim with anger and betrayal. Moira, realizing that she had been exposed, that her game was over, let out a scream of rage and frustration. She tried to fight, to escape, but she was quickly overpowered and disarmed. Cecily, her heart pounding in her chest, looked at Gareth, who was clutching his wounded arm, his face pale with pain. "Thank you, Gareth," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have saved my life. You have saved the keep." Gareth nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. "I was a fool, my lady," he said. "I almost betrayed my lord. I almost betrayed everything I believe in." "You have redeemed yourself, Gareth," Cecily said. "You have proven your loyalty." With Moira captured and her plot exposed, Cecily took control of the keep, preparing for the inevitable attack from Lord Renly. She knew that William was on his way back, but she didn't know when he would arrive. She had to hold the keep, to defend it against Renly's forces, until he returned. As she stood on the battlements, looking out at the approaching army, she felt a surge of fear, but also a sense of determination. She was Lady de Moray, the mistress of Moray Keep, and she would defend her home, her people, her husband's legacy, with every fiber of her being. The unveiling was complete. It was time. Chapter 13. Beneath a moonless sky. The night of the attack was moonless, the sky a vast expanse of impenetrable darkness. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves in the wind. Cecily stood on the battlements of Moray Keep, her senses on high alert, straining to detect any sign of the approaching enemy. She had done everything she could to prepare for the assault. The walls had been reinforced, the gates secured, and the men-at-arms positioned strategically throughout the keep. She had sent scouts to patrol the surrounding area, to give them early warning of Renly's approach. She wore a suit of light armor, borrowed from William's armory, over a simple tunic and breeches. The metal felt cold and unfamiliar against her skin, but it gave her a sense of protection, a feeling of readiness. A sword hung at her side, its weight a constant reminder of the deadly task that lay ahead. Alara stood beside her, her face pale but determined. She had refused to stay in the safety of the keep, insisting on joining Cecily on the battlements. "They will come soon, my lady," she said, her voice low and steady. "We must be ready." Cecily nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the walls. She felt a knot of fear tightening in her stomach, but she forced herself to remain calm, to project an image of strength and confidence to her men. Suddenly, a shout rang out from one of the watchtowers. "They are here. They are approaching from the north." Cecily's heart leaped into her throat. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She drew her sword, the steel gleaming in the faint light of the torches that lined the battlements. "Prepare yourselves," she cried, her voice ringing out through the night. "For Moray. For William." The men-at-arms responded with a roar of defiance, their swords raised, their shields held high. They were ready to fight, to defend their home, their lord, their lady. The first wave of attackers surged towards the walls, a mass of shadowy figures wielding swords, axes, and spears. They carried ladders, intending to scale the walls and breach the keep's defenses. Cecily, drawing on a courage she didn't know she possessed, joined the men-at-arms in repelling the attack. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her sword flashing in the darkness, deflecting blows, striking down enemies. The battle raged for hours, a chaotic melee of clashing steel, shouts of pain, and cries of defiance. The air was thick with the smell of blood, sweat, and fear. Cecily fought tirelessly, her body aching, her mind numb with the relentless violence. She saw men fall around her, struck down by arrows, swords, and axes. She saw the fear in their eyes, the pain in their faces. But she also saw their courage, their determination, their unwavering loyalty. At one point, she found herself face to face with Lord Renly himself, a tall, imposing figure with a cruel, sneering face. He recognized her, his eyes widening in surprise. "Lady de Moray," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. So the little bird has decided to fight. You should have stayed in your cage. This is my home, Renly, Cecily retorted, her voice trembling but firm. And I will defend it to my last breath. They clashed, their swords meeting in a shower of sparks. Renly was a skilled warrior, his blows powerful and relentless. Cecily fought defensively, parrying his attacks, trying to find an opening. She managed to land a blow, her sword slicing across his arm, drawing a cry of pain. But he retaliated, his sword striking her shoulder, knocking her to the ground. She lay there, dazed, her vision blurring. Renly loomed over her, his sword raised, ready to deliver the final blow. "Goodbye, Lady de Moray," he said, his voice filled with a triumphant sneer. Cecily closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Suddenly, a roar echoed through the night, a sound that sent a shiver down Cecily's spine. Moray. She opened her eyes, her heart leaping with hope. William. He had returned. She saw him, riding through the gates of the keep on his great black stallion, Shadow, his sword raised, his face a mask of fury. He was leading a contingent of fresh troops, reinforcements who had arrived just in the nick of time. The tide of the battle turned. William's arrival, and the sight of their lord fighting at their side, instilled new vigor in the defenders and demoralized Renly. The fighting continued, but now, it was the attackers who were on the defensive, their ranks thinning, their morale crumbling. Cecily, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, rose to her feet, her sword still in her hand. She saw William fighting his way towards Renly, his movements fluid and deadly. She watched as they clashed, their swords meeting in a furious exchange. William, fueled by rage and a burning desire for vengeance, quickly gained the upper hand. He disarmed Renly, his sword knocking his enemy's weapon to the ground. Renly, defeated and humiliated, fell to his knees, his eyes filled with fear. William stood over him, his sword pointed at his throat, his face a mask of cold fury. The battle was over. Moray Keep had been saved. William, sheathing his sword, reached down to help Cecily up. His hand, covered in a gauntlet, was gentle as it took hers. He searched her eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. Cecily shook her head. "I am fine." She looked at her husband, and for the first time, she felt no fear, just relief. William then turned and addressed the remaining soldiers. "Secure the prisoners. Tend to the wounded." His voice was clear and carried easily. His soldiers quickly obeyed. He looked once more at Cecily, and she saw relief. He cupped her face and, for the first time, kissed her. Not on the forehead, but fully, in front of everyone, on her mouth. And the kiss lingered, under the moonless sky. Chapter 14. The Gathering Storm. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of both relief and devastation. The courtyard of Moray Keep was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, blood, and the lingering scent of fear. Cecily, despite her exhaustion and the throbbing pain in her shoulder, moved among the wounded, offering comfort, directing the servants, and ensuring that everyone received the care they needed. William, his face grim and his armor stained with blood, oversaw the securing of the prisoners and the clearing of the battlefield. He had ordered Renly to be held in the keep's dungeon, along with Moira, who had been found hiding in her chambers, her face a mask of fear and despair. Once the immediate chaos had subsided, William sought out Cecily. He found her in the great hall, tending to Gareth, who was lying on a makeshift bed, his arm bandaged and his face pale with pain. William knelt beside them, his gaze filled with concern. "How is he?" he asked Cecily. "He is weak, but he will live," Cecily replied. "He lost a lot of blood, but Elara has managed to stop the bleeding." William turned to Gareth, his voice filled with gratitude. "Gareth," he said, "you saved my wife's life. You proved your loyalty. I am in your debt." Gareth managed a weak smile. "My lord," he said, his voice strained. I was a fool. I almost betrayed you. I am ashamed. You have redeemed yourself. Gareth, William said. You have shown true courage and loyalty. You will be rewarded. William then turned his attention to Cecily, his gaze softening as he looked at her. He gently touched her injured shoulder, his fingers tracing the outline of the wound beneath her armor. You are brave, Cecily, he said, his voice filled with admiration. You fought like a true warrior. You defended the keep, our people. Cecily met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a growing affection for this man, her husband, who had returned just in time to save them all. I did what I had to do, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I had to protect our home, our people. You did more than that, William said. You inspired them. You gave them courage. You led them. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. Come, he said. You need to rest. You need to be tended to. He led her to their chambers, the room that had once felt so cold and unfamiliar, but now felt like a haven, a place of safety and refuge. He helped her remove her armor, his touch gentle and careful. He examined her wound, his brow furrowed with concern. It is not deep, he said, his voice reassuring. But it needs to be cleaned and bandaged. He summoned Alara, who quickly and efficiently tended to Cecily's wound, applying a soothing salve and wrapping it in clean linen. Once Cecily was settled in bed, William sat beside her, his hand still holding hers. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that she had never seen before. I almost lost you, he said, his voice raw with emotion. When I saw Renly standing over you, his sword raised, I thought he couldn't finish the sentence, his voice choked with emotion. Cecily squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the pain he had endured, the fear he had felt. I am here, William, she said, her voice soft and soothing. I am safe. We are both safe. He leaned down and kissed her, a tender, lingering kiss that spoke of gratitude, relief, and a growing love that had blossomed amidst the chaos and violence of their lives. But the storm was not yet over. The threat of rebellion still loomed large, and William knew that he had to deal with Renly and Moira to ensure the safety and security of his lands and his people. He had to make difficult decisions, to mete out justice, to uphold the laws of the realm. The king would be arriving soon, that much was known, and the future was still unwritten. But for now, under the flickering candlelight, some peace was found. Chapter 15. Flames of Rebellion. The arrival of the king cast a long shadow over Moray Keep. King Edmund, a stern and imposing figure, arrived with a large retinue of knights, advisors, and courtiers, filling the keep to overflowing. He immediately convened a council of war, summoning William, Cecily, and the other key figures involved in the recent battle. The Great Hall, usually a place of feasting and celebration, was transformed into a scene of tense deliberation and political maneuvering. The king sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of grim determination. William and Cecily sat on either side of him, their presence a testament to their roles in defending the keep. The council discussed the ongoing rebellion, the threat posed by the remaining rebel lords, and the strategies for quelling the unrest. The king listened intently, his eyes sharp and discerning, his questions probing and insightful. William, as the Lord of Moray Keep and a key figure in the defense of the Northern Territories, played a prominent role in the discussions. He reported on the attack, the capture of Renly and Moira, and the intelligence gathered from the spy, Thomas. Cecily, though initially hesitant to speak in such a formal and intimidating setting, found her voice. She spoke of the courage and loyalty of the people of Moray Keep, of their willingness to fight for their home and their lord. She spoke of the need for justice, but also for mercy, for understanding the root causes of the rebellion and addressing the grievances of the people. The king listened to her with a mixture of surprise and respect. He had expected a timid, subservient wife, but he found a strong, articulate woman who was clearly a force to be reckoned with. The council turned its attention to the fate of Renly and Moira. The king, known for his harsh justice, was inclined to order their immediate execution, a clear message to any who would dare to defy his authority. William, however, argued for a more measured approach. He acknowledged Renly's crimes, his treachery and violence, but he also pointed out that executing him without a proper trial would only further inflame the rebellion, turning Renly into a martyr and driving more people to join the rebel cause. Cecily supported William's argument, speaking passionately about the need for justice tempered with mercy, for finding a way to heal the wounds of the conflict, to bring lasting peace to the realm. The king, swayed by their arguments and impressed by their wisdom, agreed to hold a trial for Renly, a public spectacle that would demonstrate his authority, but also his commitment to justice. The trial was held in the courtyard of Moray Keep, before the assembled people of the keep and the surrounding villages. Renly, bound and shackled, was brought before the king, his face pale and defiant. The charges against him were read aloud: treason, rebellion, attempted murder. Witnesses were called, including Gareth, who testified to Moira's plot and Renly's involvement. Thomas, the spy, also testified, confirming Renly's plans to attack the keep. Renly, given a chance to speak, refused to beg for mercy. He maintained his defiance, claiming that he was fighting for the freedom of his people against the tyranny of the king. The king, after hearing all the evidence, pronounced his judgment. Renly was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. The execution was to be carried out the following day. The attention then turned to Moira. She was brought before the king, her red hair disheveled, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hatred. The charges against her were read: treason, conspiracy, attempted murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including the testimony of Gareth and Alara, and the incriminating words overheard by Cecily in William's study. Moira, unlike Renly, did not maintain a defiant silence. She pleaded for her life, claiming that she had been manipulated by Renly, that she had acted out of love for William, that she had been driven by jealousy and despair. Cecily, watching Moira's desperate pleas, felt a flicker of pity. She understood the pain of unrequited love, the sting of jealousy, the desperation that could drive a person to make terrible choices. But she also knew that Moira's actions had consequences, that her treachery had put lives at risk, that she had betrayed the trust of her own family. The king, unmoved by Moira's pleas, pronounced his judgment. Moira was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to imprisonment, not death. Cecily was surprised by the king's leniency. She had expected a harsher sentence, given Moira's crimes. She looked at William, seeking an explanation, but his face was unreadable. Later that evening, as they were alone in their chambers, Cecily asked him about it. "Why did the king spare Moira's life?" she asked. "He is known for his harsh justice. Why show her mercy?" William sighed, his gaze shifting away from hers. "He did it for me," he said, his voice low and strained. He knows about my past with Moira. He knows that I cared for her, once." Cecily felt a pang of jealousy, a resurgence of the old insecurities. "So, he spared her out of pity? Out of respect for your past feelings?" William shook his head. "Not pity, Cecily," he said. "Respect. He respects the bond we once shared, the loyalty she showed me in the past. He also believes that imprisonment is a more fitting punishment. It will allow her to reflect on her crimes, to repent, to perhaps, one day, find redemption." He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, his gaze filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "But that is the past, Cecily," he said. "Moira is a shadow of what was. You are my present, my future." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. "You are my wife," he said, his voice filled with a love that was no longer tentative, no longer uncertain, but strong and unwavering. "And I love you." The flames of rebellion, though dampened, still flickered. But in their chambers, a different kind of flame was burning, a flame of love, of trust, of a bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was all that mattered. Chapter 16. A Heart Divided. Despite William's declaration of love, Cecily found herself struggling with lingering doubts and insecurities. The king's decision to spare Moira's life, though understandable in the context of William's past, had reopened old wounds, stirring up feelings of jealousy and inadequacy. She couldn't shake the image of Moira, the beautiful, fierce woman who had once held William's heart, who had shared his grief, his pain, his loyalty. She tried to hide her feelings, to appear strong and confident, but William, perceptive as ever, sensed her inner turmoil. He tried to reassure her, to reaffirm his love, but his words, though sincere, seemed to fall short, unable to fully dispel the shadows that haunted her heart. The execution of Renly, carried out with grim ceremony in the courtyard of Moray Keep, further deepened the somber mood that had settled over the household. Cecily, though she understood the necessity of the act, found herself disturbed by the brutality of it, by the finality of death. She sought solace in her duties, overseeing the running of the keep, tending to the needs of the people, and trying to restore a sense of normalcy to their lives. She found a measure of comfort in the familiar routines, in the simple acts of caring and service. But her heart remained divided, torn between her growing love for William and her lingering fear that she would never truly measure up to Moira, that she would always be second best, a substitute for the woman he had truly loved. One afternoon, as she was walking through the keep, she encountered Moira, being escorted by 2 guards to the tower where she was being held prisoner. Moira, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair, stopped in front of Cecily. "You think you have won," Moira said, her voice low and venomous. "You think you have taken my place, stolen my life. But you are wrong. You will never have him. Not truly. He will always belong to me." Cecily met Moira's gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of pity and defiance. "You are mistaken, Moira," she said. "William is not a prize to be won, a possession to be claimed. He is a man with his own heart, his own mind, his own choices. And he has chosen me." "He has chosen duty," Moira retorted. "He has chosen obligation. He has chosen the alliance between your houses. But he has not chosen love. He will never love you the way he loved me." The words stung, hitting Cecily with a force that took her breath away. She wanted to deny them, to refute them with all her might, but a seed of doubt had been planted, a seed that threatened to blossom into a full-blown fear. "You are wrong," Cecily said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. "William, he does love me. He has shown me kindness, respect, affection." "Kindness? Respect? Affection?" Moira laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Those are the crumbs he throws to you, the scraps of emotion he can spare from his true devotion. He pities you, Cecily. He sees you as a weak, fragile creature who needs his protection. But he does not love you as he loved me, with his whole being." Cecily flinched, Moira's words piercing her heart like shards of glass. She turned to leave, unable to bear the sight of Moira's triumphant, hateful gaze. But before she could take a step, Moira spoke again, her voice softer now, filled with a hint of regret. "I did love him, Moira said. With all my heart, with all my soul. I would have done anything for him. I would have died for him." Cecily stopped, her back to Moira, her heart aching with a strange mixture of anger, pity, and understanding. She knew what it was like to love someone with such intensity, such desperation. "I know," Cecily said, her voice barely a whisper. "But love, it is not always enough. It can blind us, lead us astray, make us do terrible things." She turned back to Moira, her eyes filled with a newfound compassion. "I am sorry, Moira," she said. "I am sorry for your pain, for your loss. But I cannot change the past. And I will not let your bitterness destroy my future." She walked away, leaving Moira standing alone in the corridor, her face a mask of despair. Cecily's heart was still heavy, still divided, but she had taken a step towards healing, towards finding a way to reconcile her love for William with the lingering shadows of his past. She needed to speak to William, she decided, openly and honestly. She could not carry this on her own. She walked to their chambers, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. The truth was to be faced. Chapter 17. The Lion's Roar. Cecily found William in their chambers, standing by the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. He turned as she entered, his face etched with concern. He had sensed her distress, her inner turmoil. "Cecily," he said, his voice gentle. "What is it? What troubles you?" She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been fully honest with him about her feelings, about her insecurities regarding Moira. She had always tried to appear strong, confident, the worthy Lady de Moray. But now, she knew that she could no longer hide her true emotions, that she had to be vulnerable, to risk his rejection, in order to find true peace, true connection. I spoke to Moira," she said, her voice trembling slightly. William's expression changed, a flicker of surprise, of apprehension, crossing his features. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice guarded. Cecily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She said that you would never love me, that you would always belong to her, that your marriage to me was a duty, an obligation, not a choice of the heart." William's face hardened, his eyes turning cold. He didn't deny it. "Moira speaks out of bitterness, out of despair," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She cannot accept that things have changed." "But is it true, William?" Cecily pressed, her voice rising slightly. "Do you still love her? Do you regret marrying me?" He turned away, his jaw clenched, his shoulders tense. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Cecily felt her heart breaking. She had her answer, she thought. His silence confirmed her worst fears. But then, he turned back to her, his eyes filled with a raw, intense emotion that she had never seen before. It was not anger, not regret, but pain. Deep, abiding pain. "I did love Moira," he said, his voice raw with honesty. "I loved her with all my heart, with all my soul. She was my friend, my confidant, my lover. We shared a bond forged in grief, in loss, in a shared desire for vengeance." He paused, his gaze shifting to the floor, as if he were reliving the memories of his past. "But that was a long time ago. Before Alara's death. Before the oath. Before I met you." He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers, his gaze filled with a sincerity that pierced her heart. "When I married you, Cecily," he said, his voice low and intense, "I thought I was simply fulfilling my duty, obeying my king's command. I thought I was incapable of love, of feeling anything but emptiness, bitterness." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. "But you changed everything. You showed me kindness, compassion, strength. You challenged me, inspired me, made me feel again." His voice broke, his eyes welling up with tears. "I was afraid, Cecily," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Afraid to love again, afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to risk losing everything, again." He took her hands, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "But I am not afraid anymore," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I love you, Cecily. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because you are you. You are my wife, my partner, my everything." He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of a love that had been forged in the crucible of adversity, a love that had overcome doubt, fear, and the shadows of the past. Cecily responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. She felt a surge of relief, of joy, of a love that was no longer tentative, no longer uncertain, but strong and unwavering. But as they embraced, a sudden commotion erupted outside the chamber. Shouts, cries, the clang of steel on steel. William broke the kiss, his eyes widening in alarm. "What is it?" he said, his voice sharp with concern. They rushed to the window, looking out at the courtyard below. They saw a scene of chaos, of fighting, of flames. A group of men, dressed in the colors of Lord Renly, had somehow infiltrated the keep, bypassing the guards, and were attacking the unsuspecting defenders. They were setting fire to the buildings, sowing panic and confusion. "The rebellion," William said, his voice grim. "It is not over." He grabbed his sword, his face a mask of fury. "I must go," he said. "I must rally the men." Cecily, her heart pounding with fear, grabbed his arm. "Be careful, William," she pleaded. "Please be careful." He kissed her forehead, a quick, reassuring gesture. "I will," he said. "And I will return. I promise you." He rushed out of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Cecily, left alone, her heart filled with a renewed sense of dread, could only pray for his safety, for his return. The lion had roared, and the battle had begun anew. Chapter 18. Scars of Forgiveness. Cecily, refusing to remain idle while William and his men fought to quell the renewed rebellion, donned her armor once more and rushed out of the chambers, determined to join the fray. As she ran through the corridors of the keep, she encountered scenes of chaos and violence. Men at arms clashed with the infiltrating rebels, swords flashing in the flickering light of the burning buildings. The air was thick with smoke, the cries of the wounded, and the shouts of command. She found Alara, directing a group of servants in forming a bucket brigade to extinguish the flames that threatened to engulf the stables. Cecily joined them, helping to pass buckets of water, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As they worked, she saw a group of rebels heading towards the tower where Moira was being held prisoner. She realized, with a chilling certainty, that their intention was to free Moira, to use her as a rallying point for the remaining rebel forces. She shouted a warning to the guards stationed near the tower, but it was too late. The rebels overwhelmed them, cutting them down with brutal efficiency. Cecily, abandoning the bucket brigade, drew her sword and rushed towards the tower, determined to prevent Moira's escape. She encountered several rebels along the way, engaging them in a desperate fight. She fought with a ferocity born of fear and a fierce determination to protect her home, her husband, her newfound love. She reached the entrance to the tower, just as the rebels were emerging, dragging a struggling Moira with them. Moira's eyes met Cecily's, her face a mask of surprise and something else. Was it fear? Regret? Cecily charged forward, her sword raised, ready to strike. But before she could reach them, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure she recognized instantly. It was Thomas, the spy, the man she had spared, the man who had carried her message to William. Thomas, wielding a sword he had somehow acquired, attacked the rebels, his movements swift and deadly. He fought with a surprising ferocity, driven by a desire to redeem himself, to repay Cecily's kindness. He managed to cut down several of the rebels, creating an opening for Cecily to reach Moira. Cecily, seizing the opportunity, grabbed Moira's arm, pulling her away from the remaining rebels. "Why are you doing this?" Moira asked, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. "I am your enemy. I tried to kill you." "You are my husband's kin," Cecily replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "And I will not let you be used as a pawn in this senseless rebellion." Together, Cecily and Moira, along with Thomas, fought their way back towards the Great Hall, where William and his men were regrouping. They encountered more rebels along the way, engaging them in a series of desperate skirmishes. As they reached the Great Hall, they saw William, his face grim and his armor stained with blood, directing the defense of the keep. He saw Cecily and Moira, his eyes widening in surprise and relief. "Cecily," he cried, "you're safe." He rushed towards them, his sword raised, ready to protect them from any remaining rebels. But the fighting was subsiding. The rebels, outnumbered and outmatched, were being captured or killed. With the immediate threat over, William turned his attention to Moira. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a flicker of understanding, of compassion. "Moira," he said, his voice low and strained. Why did you continue this madness?" Moira looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lost. I was driven by jealousy, by hatred, by a desire for revenge." She looked at Cecily, her gaze softening slightly. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything." Cecily met Moira's gaze, her heart filled with a strange mixture of pity and forgiveness. She saw the pain in Moira's eyes, the regret, the realization of the terrible consequences of her actions. "We have all made mistakes," Moira, Cecily said. "We have all been driven by fear, by anger, by love. But it is never too late to change, to choose a different path." William, moved by Cecily's words and by Moira's apparent remorse, made a decision. He ordered Moira to be confined to her chambers, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. He offered her a chance to redeem herself, to prove her loyalty, to help him rebuild the peace that had been shattered by the rebellion. The scars of forgiveness, Cecily realized, were sometimes deeper, more profound, than the scars of battle. They were the scars of healing, of reconciliation, of choosing compassion over hatred, of finding a way to move forward, together. The path would not be easy, but it was there. Chapter 19. The Dawn's Embrace. In the days following the quashed rebellion, a fragile peace settled over Moray Keep. The damage to the keep was slowly repaired, the wounded were tended to, and the dead were mourned. The king, satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, departed with his retinue, leaving William to oversee the rebuilding of his lands and the reconciliation of his people. William, guided by Cecily's counsel and his own growing sense of justice and compassion, implemented a series of reforms aimed at addressing the grievances that had fueled the rebellion. He reduced taxes, eased restrictions on trade, and established a council of elders, representing the various villages and communities within his domain, to advise him on matters of governance. Moira, confined to her chambers, remained a silent, brooding presence within the keep. Cecily, despite her initial apprehension, made an effort to reach out to her, to offer her a chance to redeem herself, to find a new purpose in life. She visited Moira regularly, bringing her food, books, and news of the outside world. She spoke to her calmly, patiently, trying to understand the pain and bitterness that had driven her to such desperate acts. At first, Moira was resistant, her heart hardened by years of resentment and regret. She refused to speak, to acknowledge Cecily's presence, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. But Cecily persisted, her kindness and compassion slowly chipping away at Moira's defenses. She spoke of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of the possibility of finding peace and redemption, even after making terrible mistakes. Slowly, gradually, Moira began to respond. She started to speak, to share her feelings, her fears, her regrets. She confessed her jealousy of Cecily, her resentment of her marriage to William, her belief that she had been robbed of her rightful place. Cecily listened patiently, offering empathy and understanding, but also challenging Moira's assumptions, her distorted view of reality. She spoke of William's love for her, a love that was not based on duty or obligation, but on genuine affection, respect, and shared values. She also spoke of her own insecurities, her initial fear of William, her doubts about her ability to measure up to Moira, to the woman he had once loved. She revealed her vulnerability, her own journey of self-discovery and growth. Through these conversations, a fragile bond began to form between the two women, a bond built on shared pain, shared understanding, and a mutual desire for healing and reconciliation. Moira, for the first time, began to see Cecily not as a rival, an enemy, but as a fellow human being, a woman who had suffered, who had loved, who had striven to do what was right. One day, as Cecily was leaving Moira's chambers, Moira stopped her. "Cecily," she said, her voice hesitant, her eyes filled with a flicker of hope. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Cecily smiled, her heart filled with a warmth that spread through her entire being. "We all deserve a second chance, Moira," she said. "We all deserve a chance to find redemption." As the weeks passed, Moira began to emerge from her self-imposed isolation. She started to participate in the life of the keep, offering her skills and knowledge to help with the rebuilding efforts. She worked alongside the servants, tending to the wounded, repairing the damaged buildings, and assisting with the planting of the spring crops. She and Cecily, though not friends in the traditional sense, developed a working relationship, a mutual respect based on shared experience, and a common goal of restoring peace and prosperity to Moray Keep. One morning, as Cecily was walking through the gardens, she saw William and Moira standing together, talking quietly. Her heart skipped a beat, a flicker of the old jealousy surfacing. But as she approached, she saw that they were not engaged in a romantic conversation, but in a discussion about the best way to improve the irrigation system for the fields. William saw her approaching and smiled, his eyes filled with a warmth that reassured her, that banished any lingering doubts. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, and drew her into the conversation. The three of them, William, Cecily, and Moira, stood together in the dawn's embrace, the rising sun casting a golden glow on the landscape, symbolizing a new beginning, a new hope for the future. The scars of the past remained, but they were fading, replaced by the promise of healing, of reconciliation, of a love that had endured, that had grown stronger, in the face of adversity. The keep, the land, and the people were beginning to heal, together. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. A year passed, a year of rebuilding, of healing, of reconciliation. Moray Keep, once a scene of violence and betrayal, had been transformed into a place of peace and prosperity. The fields were green with crops, the villages were bustling with activity, and the people, once divided by fear and suspicion, were united in their loyalty to William and Cecily. Cecily, no longer the timid, uncertain bride, had blossomed into a confident, compassionate leader, respected and loved by all. She had proven herself to be a worthy Lady de Moray, a woman of strength, wisdom, and grace. William, freed from the shackles of his past, had embraced his role as a just and benevolent lord. He had learned to temper his warrior spirit with compassion, his sense of duty with a deep and abiding love for his wife. Moira, her heart slowly mending, had found a new purpose in life, serving the people of Moray Keep with her skills and knowledge. She had earned the respect of the household, and while she and Cecily would never be close friends, they had forged a bond of mutual understanding and respect. One spring morning, as Cecily and William were walking through the gardens, hand in hand, they paused to admire the blossoms on the ancient apple tree, the same tree where William had first shown Cecily the falcon, Lyra. "It seems like a lifetime ago," Cecily said, her voice filled with a mixture of nostalgia and wonder. "So much has changed." William nodded, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes filled with a love that had deepened and matured over the course of their tumultuous journey. "We have been through much, Cecily," he said, "but we have emerged stronger, together." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw. "I love you, Cecily," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that made her heart swell. "More than I ever thought possible." Cecily leaned into his touch, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "And I love you, William," she said. "With all my heart, with all my soul." They embraced, their bodies melting together, their hearts beating as one. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale castle, but in the real world, a world filled with challenges, with pain, but also with the enduring power of love, of forgiveness, of redemption. As they stood there, a figure approached them, a figure they both recognized. It was Alara, the housekeeper, her face beaming with joy. "My lord, my lady," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I have news. Wonderful news." She paused, her eyes shining with tears. "You are with child, my lady," she said. "You're going to have a baby." Cecily gasped, her hand flying to her stomach, her heart overflowing with a joy she had never imagined possible. William's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a love so profound, so overwhelming, that it took her breath away. He swept her up in his arms, his laughter echoing through the gardens. "A child," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We are going to have a child." They stood there, bathed in the golden light of the morning sun, their hearts filled with a joy that transcended all the pain, all the struggles, all the shadows of the past. They had faced their reckoning, the reckoning of love and duty, and they had emerged victorious, their love stronger, their bond unbreakable. Their future, once uncertain, now stretched before them, filled with the promise of new life, new hope, new beginnings. The legacy of Moray Keep, once threatened by betrayal and violence, was now secure, entrusted to the loving hands of William and Cecily and the child they would soon welcome into the world. The circle was complete. Epilogue. Years flowed like a river, carving their passage through the landscape of Moray Keep. The child, a son named Alaric, after Cecily's father, grew into a strong, intelligent young man, embodying the best qualities of both his parents. He was followed by a daughter, Alara, named for the faithful housekeeper, a girl with her mother's gentle spirit and her father's fierce determination. William and Cecily ruled Moray Keep with wisdom and compassion, their love for each other and their people a beacon of hope and stability in a turbulent world. They fostered a sense of community, of belonging, ensuring that all who lived under their protection felt valued and respected. Moira, her heart finally healed, found peace and purpose in serving the people of Moray Keep. She became a trusted advisor to Cecily, her knowledge and skills invaluable in managing the affairs of the household and the surrounding lands. She never married, dedicating her life to the service of others, finding redemption in acts of kindness and compassion. Gareth, his loyalty unwavering, continued to serve William faithfully, rising through the ranks to become captain of the guard, a position he held with honor and distinction. He married a local woman, a kind and gentle soul, and they raised a family of their own, their children playing alongside the children of William and Cecily. The scars of the past, though they remained, faded with time, becoming reminders of the challenges overcome, the lessons learned, the strength found in adversity. The story of William and Cecily, of their forbidden love, their trials and tribulations, their ultimate triumph, became a legend, whispered around firesides, passed down through generations. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills surrounding Moray Keep, William and Cecily, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces lined with the wisdom of years, stood together on the battlements, watching their grandchildren play in the courtyard below. William took Cecily's hand, his fingers, still strong despite the passage of time, interlacing with hers. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with the passing years. "We have built a good life, Cecily," he said, his voice filled with a quiet contentment. "A life filled with love, with family, with purpose." Cecily smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "We have, William," she said, "and we have done it together." They stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun, two figures who had weathered the storms of life, who had faced their demons, who had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the real world, a world where love, forgiveness, and redemption were not just words, but the very foundation of their lives. Their legacy was secure, built upon a foundation of love, loyalty, and resilience.